Okay, so good morning. Well, good afternoon. I'm obviously in Europe, but Matt is probably in Asia here. And welcome to Future Bite, Matt, and everyone listening. So the Future Green podcast where sustainability meets real world action. I'm Heidi. For those of you who don't know me, I'm founder of Future Green, and I'm super excited that you're here. Today, I am super excited and thrilled to have a very special guest on, a good friend of mine, Matt Friedman. Matt is CEO of the Mekong Club, a trailblazing organization tackling one of the world's most pressing human rights issues, that is modern slavery. And Matt, you're a top voice on this issue with 17,000 followers on LinkedIn. You really are leading the conversation in this space and taking action on it. From the very start, the Mekong Club has been a valued partner of Future Green, and we always admire your work, especially your relentless commitment to bringing businesses together to fight exploitation. And so a very quick intro to Matt. He's also the author of several books, and later in the episode, we'll dive into one of them. So in this Future Bites conversation, we'll get to know Matt much deeper and his journey, a little bit about his mission and the impact that he's driving across the world. Matt, why don't you introduce yourself? We've collaborated with Matt on a few occasions, mainly on events in Hong Kong. So helping businesses to understand a little bit more, especially around a food supply chain. Yeah, tell us about yourself, your journey, and how you became a leading voice in modern slavery. And just for listeners who don't know the Mekong Club, what inspired you? And can you do that in 60 seconds?
Well, my name is Matt Friedman. I've been working on addressing the issue of human trafficking for about 35 years. Spent 8 years in Nepal, 5 years in Bangladesh, 10 years in Thailand, and the rest of the time here in Hong Kong. My journey has started by looking at sex trafficking and, the terrible situation of girls being tricked and deceived and forced into prostitution, forced to be with 4, 5, 8, 10 guys a day, every day. And because of the moral repugnance of that, I was just, as a human being, just so bothered by that I felt like I needed to get involved in order to address that. After a while, I started focusing not only on that, but also on forced labor issues and so forth. And then I joined the United Nations, ran one of the largest United Nations programs in the world focusing on this issue, had offices in China, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar. And all of that work helped me to understand the issue, what needed to be done. But I was super frustrated with both the United States government and the United Nations in terms of the pace and urgency of this issue. So I set up the Mekong Club in Hong Kong because the private sector has a role to play in addressing human trafficking. And the thing about the private sector is they find any vulnerability that could result in a naming and shaming situation for their organization. They're going to act very quickly. And so what I do is I work with the private sector, I educate them, inform them, give them all the information they need in order to address this issue. And as a result of that, I'm able to see kind of instant results related to this particular topic. And there's a lot of private companies that really do care about making the world a better place. And I love working with these individuals because they have so much enthusiasm to do the right thing.
Yeah, wow, that is a lot to take in there. You've definitely had a long history working in that space. So let's just step back a little bit for people who are new to this term. And I think we've all heard of modern slavery, but you also mentioned human trafficking. Can we just get back to basics? How do you define this term, human trafficking and modern slavery? Because it can, and also it can feel quite distant for people, living where we are in Hong Kong or also in the West, because we don't see it physically, visually every day. Yeah. What is it? How would you define it? And why is
Well,
it like a
you
global
an
issue?
example of it, just because it's easier to kind of describe it once you've described it. A 15-year-old boy from Cambodia is told by his family he has to go to Thailand in order to get a job. They're poor. He has to send money back. He gets there. He's looking for work, not finding it. Human traffickers see this, go up to him and say, looks like you need some help. Let me lend you a little bit of money. Okay, well, now that you have my money, you have to stay with me. But guess what? I got this great job. I'm going to take you down to the ocean, put you on a boat. Boat will go out for a couple of months. You'll catch some fish. You'll come back. You'll be a hero to your family. So he goes down to the ocean, gets on the boat, doesn't realize he's been sold onto the boat. The boat goes out, but it doesn't come back after 3 months. It stays out there for 4 years. This poor kid will end up
Wow.
working 14, 15 hours a day, every day. If he doesn't, he gets beaten, he gets tortured. In order to get him to work, they give strong stimulants to him, so his body is constantly under these drugs. The only food he'll eat the entire time there is rice and fish, nothing nutritious. If he gets ill, if he gets injured, they throw him off the side of the boat. At the end of the 4 years, the boat comes in, he doesn't get anything. So what this story demonstrates is deception. He thought he was going to get something, and it turned out to be something else. Violence. If he doesn't work, he gets beaten, tortured. Basically, he doesn't get paid. All of these factors basically contribute to a situation where a person loses control of their life. They no longer have decision making. Somebody else is making it. And that's the essence of what we call modern slavery and human trafficking. Globally, there's 50 million people in this situation. In fact, there's more modern slaves than there are Canadians or Australians. About 9.2 people enter per year. That translates to about 25,000 a day. So what we're dealing with here is a huge public issue that very few people know about, but it's very, very relevant to what it is that we should know about this particular day and age.
And where it becomes relevant, I suppose, to our audience working in the food system and, purchasing, procuring food every single day, it really is quite common in the seafood supply chain. You talked about, fish and being on the boats. So this was an issue that we wanted to highlight and bring to our members around slavery on boats where you're fishing for shrimp, for fish, for any kind of fish. And it's not uncommon, actually. And so that's why in our audience, we always talk about how do we ensure that you have transparency in the supply chain and looking out for those kind of standards like the MSC, what the good people at the MSC standards, what they're doing there. Let's have a think a little bit now about, from your perspective, what do you think one of the biggest misconceptions are that people have about modern slavery? Of course, you have these organizations trying to ensure transparency, but what are some misconceptions? What do people believe to be true? Or is it that they feel helpless? Just let's say a chef or someone working in the hospitality industry, they're in charge of procuring thousands and thousands of dollars worth of food every year, hundreds of thousands, let's say in the catering industry. What can they do to ensure that they are not a part of this system going forward?
First of all, a lot of people don't understand that this is a very serious issue with many victims associated with it. Part of the problem is the terminology. When you use the terminology like slavery, people say, well, we don't have slavery. We haven't had slavery for years and years. And modern defines the fact that what we're talking about here is a new form of slavery. And so modern slavery is just the outcome of human trafficking or the outcome of forced labor and so forth. And so a lot of organizations will procure, let's say you're procuring fresh fish from Thailand, thinking that the organization that I'm buying from is doing the right thing. But that organization may not know anything about what modern slavery is and what they're required to do and how they're supposed to be doing it. And so maybe they are exploiting people as part of their supply chain, and you're buying from that particular organization. If that particular supplier gets outed and, it's in the newspapers and so forth, it ends up being on the plate of the organization that's procuring these fish and so forth. And so it's really important for individuals to understand the vulnerability that exists within their supply chain related to things like seafood or seafood packing or even chocolate or other foods that come from different parts of the world for which there's a lot of exploitation associated with it.
Yeah. And so these kind of, you talked about chocolate and even coffee. We have this challenge in the coffee supply chain, especially potentially with younger children involved. So that's where potentially businesses can be looking out for standards like fair trade. Do you agree that these organizations can help thinking about what we can really do in the food industry?
Fair trade is a good way of having another filter to determine the extent to which somebody's actually going to these sites and determining what's happening on the ground. But not all fair trade labels really live up to the standard. Some of them are much better than others. So you also have to do your due diligence on those fair trade labels, because sometimes they just come up with a label and say it's fair trade or a variation of fair trade, and it's not that. At the end of the day, it's really important for kind of the world to kind of look at these forms of human trafficking to understand it, not in the top tier, but as you get farther and farther down into the lower tiers. And let's use cocoa as an example. So what happens is a lot of the chocolate companies buy from wholesalers, but those wholesalers are buying from small farms that have a lot of exploitation taking place. And as you said, there's a lot of kids associated with the cocoa industry. So if you are buying a product that eventually gets outed as being associated with modern slavery, you have that same association. And so every once in a while, BBC will do an expose on chocolates and, the cocoa industry and children being involved. And immediately the private sector jumps on planes and flies down there and tries to do things in order to fix these things. And sometimes it works for a couple of years, but they have to maintain those programs, because if they pull out, and this is what happens, it goes right back to what it was before. So there has to be sustained efforts within these kind of sectors to ensure that the exploitation isn't systemic and doesn't continue beyond the life of the support programs that are being offered.
You really touched on an important point there, that it has to be sustained. And it's exactly what you said. Corporations just jump on the plane and go out just in that moment in time when there's that risk. So what will motivate a business to, in the long term, sustain and care about these issues? Do you think reporting, ESG reporting, is something that helps the businesses stay on top? What is it going to be in terms of ensuring that we have that, like you say, the sustained momentum, that it doesn't lapse? How do we motivate businesses to do this?
Well, let me stick with the chocolate industry because it's a good example of this. Say that you're a chocolate industry organization and you're producing chocolate for Valentine's Day and Easter and holidays and so forth. And all of a sudden, your chocolate that you want to be associated with joy and happiness and pleasure of eating and so forth has a label of modern slavery associated with it. Now, there are certain words in English, words like love and hate and abortion and slavery, that have an emotional response associated with it. When you hear it, it gives you a particular reaction. So if you have a chocolate company name and then you have modern slavery over it, it has a devastating impact on that particular business. So a lot of what motivates companies to ensure that they don't find themselves in this situation is fear of being named and shamed and associated with a particular product. So there are some organizations that have done everything they could to avoid that, so they can then start talking about ESG and being responsible and so forth. But there's a lot of companies that do this out of a fear of compliance, identifying that they have a vulnerability that could have a devastating impact on their reputation. So reputational risk is a big part of what motivates companies that are associated with vulnerable sectors like cocoa, like fishing, like some of the fruits and vegetables or palm oil that is out there, for which they have to do even more due diligence to ensure that this doesn't have a negative impact on their organization.
Hey, sorry for the interruption, but just in case you don't know who we are, I want to welcome you to the Future Green, Future Bites podcast. I'm Heidi, and this is where sustainability meets real-world action in food. I'm the founder of Future Green, and I'm thrilled you're here. Before we dive into today's guest interview, I wanted to share more about what we do. We're not just consultants, we're change makers, and we partner with communities, local suppliers, and underrepresented groups to co-create tangible solutions in food service sustainability. Whether it's designing strategy sprints, so that's our flagship workshops, or auditing supply chains, training teams with actionable tools, our mission is rooted in inclusion, impact, and transformation. And so in this series of Future Bites, we bring those stories to life. We are sitting down with inspiring leaders from our community, like our past meetup speakers or local chefs, sustainability trainers, and social innovators, to unpack their journeys, their challenges, and ideas for a greener food future. So whether you're looking to source seasonally, reduce food waste, or just bring more equity into the supply chain through reimagining menus for climate, each episode promises hope, insight, and practical step forward. So before we dig into today's conversation further, please explore how Future Green can help you and partner with you in the food service industry so that we can bring sustainability from concept to kitchen. Now let's get back to our guest interview.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So let's talk a little bit about the tools, because I know you've spent quite a lot of resources building tools at Mekong Club for corporates, for businesses to be able to use. Tell us a little bit about the resources that you've developed, and what is the role potentially of technology and AI and blockchain to tackle these issues more effectively?
Well, I'll talk about two tools that I think are really important. One of them is a baseline that we do with an organization. And so one of the first things we do when we onboard an organization into our association is a baseline to determine the extent to which they're addressing modern slavery. It's about 50 questions. And at the end of that, they get a score from 0 to 100. And that score could be, oftentimes when a new company is doing this, could be anywhere from 40, 45 to 50. And the reason why it's only 50% is that most companies don't know what it is that they need to do in order to raise awareness of their C-suite, risk assessments, to do training, to do various activities that basically protect their organization. And so by doing the baseline, we know what we need to do in order to fill the gaps. Another thing is awareness raising. And so, we have an e-learning curriculum, and it's 15 3.5-minute videos that takes bite-sized pieces of what this particular topic is, and then allows for us to educate and inform people of what this topic is. But we do it in the local language so they can learn not from English, but from whatever language they speak. When it comes to blockchain, one of the biggest issues that organizations face is not understanding their supply chain. And so AI allows us to track and trace the various levels of a supply chain. And then because AI allows us through blockchain to see the systems and the relationships that exist between these supply chains, then we can track the relationships, the extent to which there is due diligence being done, audits being done, and so forth. And as a result of that process, we can be a lot more efficient in going down to the lowest level of supply chains to really see what's happening on the ground.
So it sounds like that we have the tools. It sounds like there's not an excuse to not really get involved with looking for solutions. Sounds like you're saying the baseline needs to be there. And on this baseline survey, is it based on particular commodities, or is it the whole organization? Because I think a lot of food businesses, especially retailers, they seem to look at the issues through the lens of particular commodities. Just wondering about the amount of work that would be involved for, let's say, a retailer.
So the baseline is for the brand itself, but could also be used for the suppliers themselves. The thing is that, let's take Malaysia as an example. Malaysia and palm oil are considered to be high vulnerable types of products, both because of the geography and because of the particular product itself being associated with kind of farming that people don't want to do. But just because you are procuring from a supplier in Malaysia of palm oil doesn't mean that that one is bad or good. So there's the overall general predisposition of vulnerability, but then there's the reality of what happens on the ground. So in order to determine the extent to which suppliers are doing things, you can ask a set of simple questions. Does your management know about modern slavery? Do you have training? Do you have a policy related to this? Do you have systems and procedures to protect your workers? Do you have a remediation approach? So you can ask simple questions of suppliers to get a general sense of what's happening. If they say no to most of those, then you probably have a certain amount of vulnerability. And then you can use that as a basis of determining whether you want to work with that supplier or not. But these systems and procedures don't have to be complicated. They can be very easy. And as you say, all of the tools that are available out there are easy to access. It's just that a lot of organizations don't have this on their radar. They're not thinking about modern slavery. They're not thinking about labor issues because they're small enough that the legislation doesn't force them into a situation where they actually have to use these things. Larger companies have to, because they are held to legislation, transparency legislation that says that if you are selling products in Australia, the UK, or the United States, you have to prove that there is no association with modern slavery, but the smaller companies don't have to do that. So it's up to the bigger companies to go to the smaller companies to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, it sounds like just getting the issue in front of the CEOs and making sure that they have somebody representing the issue is absolutely critical. And also, what, as you said, if you're a smaller organization, where is the obligation there? So bringing the awareness, and organizations like yours can help do that. So we'll make sure that we put that scorecard link in the show notes, Matt, so that people can actually do something straight away. So let's move on to a little bit now, this idea that slavery is not just happening in the food supply chains. I mean, that's obviously where you and I started our conversations around food supply chains. Something that's come up recently, maybe a couple of years now, and it is not necessarily moving in the right direction in terms of help, is the scam centers, sort of a digital slavery. Could you tell us more about what that is and where we are today with that huge challenge, especially young people who are very vulnerable, especially the tech savvy?
So what happened is during COVID, you had offshore casinos out of China that were in Laos and Cambodia and Myanmar. And all of a sudden, people weren't traveling to these sites, but you had all this infrastructure and this technology. And so the criminals who were running these facilities said, okay, well, let's go into scamming. And so they came to realize that every 10th person they asked for money, they could get money. And they realized that this was a pretty lucrative way of generating cash. And so they initially went to Asian people and said, we'd like to hire you to help us to scam. But Asian people said, well, we don't want to do that. We don't feel right about that. So they started trafficking these young people to these facilities. They'd put something on social media that basically says you can go to Cambodia and have a great life and live and work in a casino, and you're going to meet all kinds of young people. But once they got there, they forced them to scam 14, 15, 16 hours a day, every day. And if they didn't, they would get beaten, tasered, tortured, terrible things would happen to them. So we're talking about 300,000 young, educated people from Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, mainland China, that have been tricked and deceived into these scam centers. So once they're there, the scam centers are these kind of almost like scam factories that have 20, 30,000 people in one location going and scamming people from Australia, Europe, China, North America, and so forth. And so they're generating tremendous amounts of money. And because they're so far away and they're in locations where there's corruption that protects them, or they're in a special economic zone where the government in Myanmar doesn't have access to them, they are protected. They're able to kind of pickpocket people 8,000 miles away. So what we have here is a new criminal scenario where you have human trafficking into the scam centers, and then the scams, and these criminals are generating huge amounts of money. And as a result of this, what used to be 39 scam centers across Southeast Asia have now expanded into South Asia, Africa, the Near East, Latin America, and so forth. So it's a very terrible criminal problem that really nobody's paying much attention to because of the distractions that are taking place with Brexit and, the Trump administration situation and what's happening with the wars and so forth. And so these criminals are developing vast amount of money that are now being put back into franchises of additional criminal activities. It's a very concerning time to be looking at what's happening on organized crime in this part of the world.
And what's very worrying and shocking for me is that the kids that are being taken, they're actually very smart, young kids. And for them to be lured into this, it's very scary. They're educated, they're university graduates or in university. So that vulnerability is astonishing that they can lure them in. And you've been talking to organizations. Can you talk to a little bit about how you've managed to get some attention on this topic, who you've been talking to, and where we can be on the lookout to get help with this kind of thing, or help people raise awareness around it?
So we were approached by some high net worth individuals to develop campaigns to prevent young people from being tricked into these scam centers, to prevent people from being scammed. So we developed a series of e-learning videos on this in multiple languages. I think we have it in 10 languages, a television commercial on this. We also are collaborating with Interpol by bringing private companies together, the banks, the manufacturers, the crypto companies, the social media companies, to identify a strategic approach that would allow for the private sector to be more actively involved in being a responder and helping out with this. So much of what we're really trying to do is to raise awareness and to find creative ways of helping to fight this particular issue. For example, one particular scam center on the border between Thailand and Myanmar at KK Park has about 40,000 victims in one location. And they get their Wi-Fi from Starlink, from Elon Musk's organization. So what we're trying to do is to reach out to them to help them to understand that they are in fact allowing this to happen. And I think if they knew about this, if you can get it to the right person, they would stop that. So what we're really trying to do is to come up with practical solutions. If you don't have Wi-Fi, you can't go around scamming people.
Right.
The other thing is, just one of the aspect of this is that these job interviews for these locations are like Zoom interviews. They use legitimate job sites in order to attract them. So as a result of that, these young people feel like, well, it must be legitimate if it's on Facebook or if it's on LinkedIn or one of these other platforms. And that masks the fact that there's this nefarious activity taking place.
Yeah. And so this is how, when we talk about what we can do as businesses, make sure that our businesses are not unknowingly supporting that system, whether it's the Wi-Fi companies or the job listing companies.
For this podcast, I'll give you a link that gives all of these videos, and we can share this with the audience. It's really important that people are educated about this, because if they don't know about it, those are the ones that get tricked into.
Yeah, intelligent, young, smart people who are digitally savvy are incredibly vulnerable in this sense. So Matt, let's talk about, this is all very eye-opening. And you're so busy, you've also recently launched your book. So we were at the launch of that a few months back. Was it March, April this year, at the gorgeous Asian Society? Tell us about this book. What, is it a memoir? How do you see this? Because, it's not your first book. Like what are your thoughts on this particular book? Why is it different?
Well, there's three aspects to the book. One is...
let's tell people the name of the book first.
Awakening the Advocate. Yeah. The first portion of the book focuses on testimonials related to sex trafficking, forced labor, the traffickers themselves, and then experiences that I've had as a counter-trafficking person, interesting, insightful experiences, the way people react to the topic, the things that we do to address it, and so forth. And there's about 50 of these stories, and each one is like 500 words, and it's little vignettes to give you a flavor of what modern slavery is. Then the second part of the book focuses on my asking myself the question, how is it that kind of a shy, introverted kid from New England in the United States found his way onto the world stage to address a justice issue like human trafficking? And so I explored from my childhood through to adulthood various experiences that I had to try to understand my journey. How did I get here? And so yet again, it's a series of vignettes, about 50 different stories from when I was 5 years old and 7 years old and 15 years old and so forth. And you begin to see that there's a certain pattern that we all have in our life that leads us down a path to a point where we eventually end up, which is related to justice. So there's certain factors related to bullying that took place in my life and injustices that I saw and experiences that I had that drew me into feeling like I wanted to be part of the process of bringing justice to those particular issues. And so that was a kind of a introspective journey to identify how I got to who I am today. And then the last part kind of brings both of those components together to make a case for the fact that we as human beings should reflect upon our life and try to make sense of whether or not we're living the life that we feel like we should be living. Because I happen to be in a profession that I love what I do. I feel like I haven't worked for 35 years because I would do what I'm doing, as a volunteer. The fact that they pay me to do this. But there's a lot of people who end up taking different jobs and opportunities and positions, and it's inconsistent with who they are. And it's really important for all of us to explore the extent to which we are mismatched or matched with the life we could have. And so the book makes the case that we should all kind of reflect upon our life and see whether or not we're living the life that we should be living.
More of a philosophical question there, isn't it?
A little bit of both. Yeah.
Did you want to share one of your vignettes? Because I know you did with me when we met. What a particular story that drove you into this type of work? Is there one in particular you might want to share?
Well, I mean, one of the earliest experiences that I had was when I was 5 years old. My mom told me about human trafficking. And the story behind that is when I was 5 years old, there was a mountain near our house. And as a 5-year-old, you shouldn't go by yourself up a mountain, but I did. And I'd collect these lava rocks and bring them back and put them under a bush. And so my mom found that these rocks were there. She assumed that I was doing something I shouldn't. She brought me outside and said, "Did you take these from Cedar Mountain?" I said, "No." "Did you take them from Cedar Mountain?" I said, "No." So she told me this story because she wanted me to understand that there were bad people out there. So she explained that her mom was coming from Germany to the United States to then meet up with her husband who had settled in Los Angeles. So she had to go across, the Atlantic and then get on a train. And when she got to Chicago, she didn't speak any English. She didn't know where she was. She thought she was in Los Angeles. So she's going around asking people, "Am I here? Am I here?" Nobody understood what she was saying. Finally, this German guy comes up and says, "Oh, yeah, you're supposed to come with me. I'm going to take you to your husband." He was a white slaver. He was about to take her off to a brothel. And he happened to just be a German speaker. Another German family saw what was happening, intervened, got her on the train, and she managed to get to Los Angeles. And then the rest is history. And basically, what she was saying is that there's people out there, bad people, who will trick you and they will lie to you and they potentially can hurt you. And that was her message to me. And so why I'm telling this story is because I never really understood how it is that I got involved in human trafficking. But maybe the seed was planted when I was 5 years old with that particular story. And so as I went through my life, I would see things that fell into something very similar to that. And it would wake up that seed that was planted by my mom that resulted me in eventually becoming somebody who went after sex trafficking victims, the same guy that was about to take my grandmother off. Mm. So it's looking at those little stories and then trying to make sense of them and trying to help to understand why it is we are who we are. And I feel like if you stop and look at, like when I was a parent with young kids, I would take my kids to parks and try to give them all kinds of experiences and so forth, so that they would someday look back at that with fond moments. How many of us had that experience with our families, all those wonderful things, but we never go back to our past to think about the good, the bad, and the ugly to make sense of ourselves. And sometimes things need to be fixed that are broken from that particular time. And other times we should just get joy and a sense of satisfaction for a life well lived. But I think we should spend more time reflecting upon looking at photos, talking about things with our parents, with our friends, reflecting upon what our life is and what our life is now and what our life can be in the future if we decide to make changes to make it closer to what we expect our life to be. But if you don't do that analysis, you don't know what you want your life to be.
And that's what you've done with this book. It's filled with all of these sobering realities and messages, I think, of hope. And when you were writing this book, do you think there was something that shifted in your own perspective? Is there something where you just had a moment, or was it really about, I need to do these reflections so I can just kind of understand why I'm here?
I think there's a couple of things that I gained from this. One is that I realized I lived a very full life. And this isn't to say that my life was perfect. I had all kinds of issues and problems and in my childhood, and I went through a divorce and I had issues at work and all kinds of other things. But I came to realize many of those bad things that happened in my life turned out to be the things that allowed me to grow as a human being to where I am now, and to understand the relevance and the importance of important things in our life: love, family, friends, contributing, volunteering, all of those things that have become inherently important aspects of my life came as a result of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so a lot of people do anything they can to avoid strife and failure and, difficulties and problems, but that's really where you come to grow, because you're challenging yourself in a way that forces you in order to make modifications and changes. And, I encourage my staff, if they're not failing in the work that we're doing, then they're not out there doing what they need to do, because that's really where we as an organization benefit from the learning experience of what works and what doesn't work. And the other thing is, I came to realize that, like, one of the driving forces that has moved me forward throughout my entire career in life is a sense of hope that the world can be a better place, that we as a world can step up and solve the issues of our time and add value to the life that we have and so forth. And that was a theme through all of those stories. And I feel blessed that I had an opportunity to experience life through this series of events in my life that brought me to where I am now, where hope and a faith for a better future is still alive and well in the way I look at the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think sometimes when things don't seem they're going your way, there's a lot of lessons learned there. And certainly in my life, career-wide, I've had plenty of ups and downs, but on reflection, there was so much learning happening to bring us where we are today, that it's so nice to learn a little bit about the Matt and not just the Mekong Club. And so that's really great. Maybe let's just wrap up with the last question for you. What is next in the next 12 months? What are you going to focus on, you personally, but also the Mekong Club? What's happening going forward?
Well, I mean, it will continue to work with the banks, the manufacturers, the retailers, the hospitality sector. But there's another kind of offshoot of all of this, which is a campaign that I started 4 or 5 years ago, the Be the Hero campaign, where I come to realize that, like, in human trafficking, we're only helping less than 1% of the victims. When it comes to addressing poverty, globally, we're helping less than 5%. When we're addressing, the environmental issues, we're only at about 10%. And so there's a lot of major issues that are not going to be addressed if we rely on just the NGOs, the United Nations, and the governments to address it, so that we as human beings have to identify what our cause is, step up and get involved. And so I wrote a book called Be the Hero, Be the Change. And the book basically makes the case that we as a world need to take some responsibility and to be a part of the solution. And so that's an area that I'm really hoping to expand on over the next couple of years, because I think that's going to be the key to really kind of having a world that is something we feel proud of when we hand it over to our children to take it to the next generation and their children and so forth.
Great. And so for anyone listening and watching, you are always open to volunteers. We'll put some information out there so that they can contact you easily. And it's the best way through email.
Yeah, just put my email address on the podcast, and I'm happy to have people contact me directly.
Amazing. Thank you, Matt. This has been really enlightening, and I really hope people will take a step forward and take action, because we all have a role to play, as you've said.
Very good. Thank you very much for the opportunity.